what's one of your favorite subjects to cover for journalism and photography?
I feel like I've been asked this before, and I don't really know the answer. I think that, and this might be kind of broad, I just, to give you an example, when I was a summer intern at the Wichita Eagle in 1995, and during that summer, they sent me all over the state for 5 weeks and into Oklahoma, shooting stories about the wheat harvest. And then the next summer, I went to Washington, D.C. and worked for a wire service on an internship where I shot in the White House, in Capitol Hill, and I hated it. And I just wanted to shoot real people doing real things. And that's not what happens in D.C. And so I came back here. Anybody that has a unique story, everyday people, it doesn't matter what that is. And then I guess the close second would be, oddly, any kind of like sketchy, dangerous, tornadoes, protests, heartbreaking news that you got to kind of pull your big boy pants on to get through. Those are I'd say what top the list.
Would you say that your connection to the community in Wichita has kind of influenced your decision on where to stay for work?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town. I'm there, like in high school, working for my hometown paper. And I learned there, like, how important, that attachment to community was. And when I got here, there are as many people in Sedgwick County as there is in the entire state of Wyoming. So Wichita was always big enough for me. And it's like, I call it like the biggest small town I've ever been in. And I think that over time, I've been able to forge connections and relationships that have definitely helped me. And in addition, I've got to do everything I ever dreamed of doing here. I had a couple of opportunities years ago where I interviewed for jobs in bigger markets. And I look back now and I think there's probably a pretty good chance that I wouldn't have held on to that job had I made it, because of a lot of the cuts that have happened in the industry over the last 10 or 15 years. So, but yeah, I love living here. I love telling the stories here, and I've gotten deeply connected to a few stories specifically over time that wouldn't have happened had I moved on.
How would you say the current economical and political situations over your time as a journalist has influenced your ability to be a journalist?
Well, obviously the main thing is just the general distrust that the public has, which is unfounded. There's been this movement politically by one of the sides to make everyday Americans feel like they can't trust legacy news sources, which I would consider the Wichita Eagle a legacy news source of this area. And on top of that, they get people are getting bombarded with misinformation and they don't have the media literacy to tell the difference. And what I've noticed is that what people want now, they don't want information, they want affirmation. They want affirmation of their already held belief, confirmation bias, 101. And so, I can't control that. I guess I just feel like all I can do is just continue to do my job and know that my reputation and the Eagles' reputation is, hold on, are you there? Spam call coming in here. But I feel like I've built up some credibility in this town over my time here. So I just continue to do what I do. I'm going to go shoot the No Kings protest Saturday, and there's going to be a few thousand people downtown. And I'm going to post those pictures on Facebook with the Kansas.com watermark. And there's going to be hundreds of people that say really stupid shit. And what can I do except to say there was an event. There was an event happening in Wichita today with several thousand people, and I'm going to cover that no matter what it's about. Mm-hmm. Because anytime you get that many people together and they're mad about something, that's newsworthy.
Going off of that, have you ever received any threats from someone because of an article, subject, or a photo that you took?
Not locally. I mean, you have to keep in mind that I spent 3 months in Baghdad in 2003, and I had a few threats on my life then. And then I had some guns pointed at me covering Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in 2008. But locally, nothing serious other than just like an angry person that insists that I not take their picture in a situation where it would be illegal for me to do so. Or don't fly your drone here, even though it's illegal for me to fly my drone there. But nothing serious enough that, I guess I will say during the George Floyd protests in 2020, there was some protests that turned into some looting of a Quick Trip at 21st and Arkansas here in Wichita, and I was taking pictures from across the street because there was a wall of armored police officers like marching towards the Quick Trip, and people were fleeing the store. It was super dark with cases of beer and cartons of cigarettes and all that stuff. And as people were running past me, I had a camera with a wide angle and a flash and was taking pictures of people running past. And then I felt I was kind of keeping my focus on the police because they were coming at me too, and they were firing flashbangs, and I felt this tug, and this fellow who I had just taken a picture of running past had come back and was trying to steal my camera off of me. And eventually in the struggle, we fell to the ground, and I had gotten my hand on the flash, and the flash snapped off, and he fell down, and I thought, but then he grabbed the camera and took off running. And I just decided that it was going to be okay to let that go rather than continue to fight with this gentleman. So that's probably the closest situation I can think of.
How do you, as a journalist, keep yourself protected in the field when it's high, intense situations like that versus sports photography? We've had a lot of photographers get injured shooting sporting events. How do you keep yourself safe?
Yeah, there's a great video of me getting run over at the Final Four in 2022. Mitch Lightfoot from KU just pile drives into me, and you see it slow-mo on national television. Camera goes flying. I was okay in that one. I learned a lot when I did those overseas assignments, Iraq and Afghanistan and Hurricane Katrina, from some of the photographers that I was working with, especially in Iraq. I worked with a Michigan legend, a guy by the name of David Gilkey, who was a Detroit Free Press photographer. And David later went on to work for NPR, and he was killed in Afghanistan in 2016. But David was my roommate in Iraq, and he was a real mentor, not just as a photographer, but as little tips about things I can do in those situations to be safe, things to look for. So like, for example, when I am at the protest this Saturday, my head will be on a swivel and I'm going to be looking for specific things. I'm going to be looking for that person that does not look like they belong there. And those people are pretty easy to spot. Most people are just there to hold their signs and make their presence known. But sometimes you'll see guys walking around and you can tell that, and maybe it's nothing, but I always keep an eye on that person. Do they drop a backpack? And then I'll be looking for cars that come by on repeat. Maybe someone's circling repeatedly. And then it's just like watching that person. So I do those things. And then I also I will know my escape routes. Like they have this protest at Douglas and Broadway, and I wish they wouldn't. I wish they would have it in a more open spot, because if something were to happen, it's going to be a stampede and it's going to be bad. So these are the things that I'm thinking about when I cover something like that.
All right. How long have you been with the Wichita Eagle? You said you started in a spring internship in 95. How long did you say you've been loyal?
Yeah, I was a summer intern in 1995, and then I became a full-time photographer here in September of 1997, so 29 years. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to hang around that long, but I did.
What would you say your professional position title is?
They call me visual journalist, because I obviously do a lot of video work now, and I've made 5 documentary films. I won a regional Emmy. I won 2 national Edward R. Murrow Awards for a documentary. And even though those projects feel like they take years off of my life, I do enjoy them. And when there was a movement to start doing more video around, I'd say 2006 or 7 was when that push really started to happen in newspapers. A lot of my colleagues complained about it. And, these are old school, guys that grew up on black and white film. And I just decided to embrace it, because, I tell people I like being a photographer, but I love being a journalist. And so, I don't really care. I write sometimes, and thankfully my journalism education, which was at the University of Nebraska, they were educating journalists on the idea that they would go work at these small town Nebraska newspapers, where you would have to do everything. You'd have to write headlines, you'd have to lay out the pages, you'd have to take the pictures. So I had to take all those classes, especially writing classes. And I didn't dislike writing. A lot of photographers just simply can't do it. But I learned how to write in a narrative style, and that has translated to being able to tell stories with video that a lot of photographers struggle with, because they don't think in that kind of storytelling fashion. So I think writing is the basis of all storytelling. If you can do that, you can do anything.
And then you were speaking, you were taught even back when you were in college that journalists, they kind of have to do everything: the writing, the photographing, the page layout. Do you think we are, as a society, steering more towards just getting multimedia journalists where they still have to do those things, or leaning more towards individual roles?
Well, I'd say definitely it's the multimedia. I think that a journalist today, a student journalist, should first and foremost learn how to write, which is, with AI stuff is becoming a little bit more of a challenge. But I think developing your own voice is important, just like developing your own style as a photographer. I think that, video and video editing is important. I think that even the ability to stand in front of the camera and talk is something I'm starting to work on a little bit. Doesn't come easy, but there's a broadcast element that I think is important too. That that's something that I didn't have to learn. Video or standing in front of a camera and giving a news report, but I think that would be important for student journalists today.
And then you mentioned AI. How do you think the influence of artificial intelligence, especially the generative with photography, videos, and writing, how do you think that's going to impact the media and the journalists?
Well, it scares the hell out of me. There are useful applications of AI for journalism, some of which we utilize here at the Eagle. When it comes to things like maybe parsing through a database more quickly or something like that. But, every day that I look at Facebook, I see an image that I can tell is not real. And most people can't. And these things get passed around as real, and it discredits, all of us when that happens, because now everybody, for me, it was, you had to not set up a picture. That was against the rules. Don't set anything up unless it's a portrait, and don't do any weird Photoshop stuff. Those were always straight to execution if you did something like that and got caught, as it should be. Mm-hmm. So naturally, you can imagine what my feelings about AI. I mean, aside from the copyright issues, I know that there's probably photos of mine that are in the AI brain that are used to create other images, and that bothers me. Mm-hmm. And I feel that it's kind of unfair that I don't really have any power to do anything about that. I know some companies like AP, et cetera, have been stay out of our stuff. But once that stuff gets out into the interwebs, what can you really do? So I just hope that what happens is that there becomes for example, and I don't get it, but I've noticed that there's this really popular trend with people your age that's oh my God, check out my Canon 81 and this film camera, this film nostalgia thing that young people seem to be into. And I'm I don't want to touch another darkroom chemical again as long as I live. I did all that through college. And most people that are shooting film are just having it digitized anyway. So I kind of what's the point? But there is some appeal, I think, to the realness of it. Mm-hmm. That we're getting to a place that eventually we're just going to we're going to yearn for real. Mm-hmm. We're going to yearn for real music and real creativity. And so I'm just thinking that even in my spare time, I'll shoot senior portraits of local kids, easy cash, $300-400 a session. But, I tell them I'm not going to put in a fake sky. Yeah. I'll get rid of your pimples because it's, but that's about it, mm-hmm. And I'm going to give you a real photograph of yourself or photographs. So, and I think that there's an appeal there. Some people still want authenticity, and I think that's going to remain.
Yeah. And then speaking on that, my entire wall is covered in Polaroids. So
that's all right.
See, I love doing the physical media and all that, but with photography, how much do you think is taught versus creative, and how much do you think you have to learn versus just having that natural ability?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I know photographers, and I've known photographers my whole life doing this, that I'm man, that guy doesn't even have to try. I don't know if you remember a name here locally. He's a photographer I worked with at the Eagle for about 20 years, Fernando Salazar. And Fernando is just like, he can't do things on a computer to save his life, but like, he's just one of the most naturally gifted eyes that I've ever seen. But I really, truly believe this, that, no matter how bad you think you are, that with photography and repetition, you can get better. And, for me, there were a lot of I was not some prodigy out of the gate. And I still take a lot of bad photos. But I had a mentor in college in Nebraska, a guy by the name of Joel Sartori. And Joel was a Nebraska guy, and then he came to work at the Wichita Eagle in the 1980s. But then he was so good, he went on to National Geographic. And at the time, so he moved back to Nebraska about the time that I started going to school there. So it's kind of a local legend in Lincoln, and super helpful with us students there at the time. And, I have said this to every young photographer that I've ever spoken to, mostly in a classroom setting. But Joel, photography can be hard. You've got all these things you got to think about. Do I have the right lens? Is my shutter speed fast enough? What am I going to do about this backlight? Oh my God, and imagine doing that back in the darkroom days where it's what if I leave my stuff in the chemicals too long? What if I don't, there was so many stages something could go wrong, from exposure to development to print. And that became such a headache that it interfered with my ability to just focus on, making a good picture. And Joel said this to me, and it was kind of an aha moment. He said, it only takes 3 things to make a great photograph. 1, good composition. And what does that mean? To Joel, it meant that your photograph was clean and free of clutter. And if there's a pole growing out of someone's head, then move. You'll have good composition if it's clean. Doesn't mean you have to follow a bunch of rules, just make it clean. The second thing, good light. And what did that mean? Well, to him, it just meant don't be in bad light. Don't go out at noon on a July day and expect to make a nice portrait outside. Just make sure it's not bad. Good light means not bad light. And the third thing is, if you can get it, some emotion or a moment. So it's okay, all I had to do was just say, how am I doing checking those boxes? And he told me 2 out of 3 in any combination is going to be a good picture. If you have all 3, it'll be great. So it's that's always kind of been my standard. If this is cluttered, we'll put on a long lens and clean it up with the depth of field thing, or, tightening up your frame. So little tricks like that really changed everything for me. It was just to I'm going to focus on those 3 things and less on, the math problem in your mind that is photography. That'll come naturally later. And of course, the cameras today are video game cheat codes in the sense of the ease of use. And, the shot I would have missed at a sporting event 20 years ago is, I'm going to have 5 options of that moment now because of 30 frames a second. Yeah. So, and that's great. I'm all for that jump in technology. But I think you can learn to be a great photographer no matter how bad you think you are. I think that's true of anybody. As long as you're not blind.
That might be a little bit hard. What are your thoughts? There have been examples throughout history of censorship in the media. What are your thoughts on journalists being censored, the media being censored, and what situations is it okay for the government to censor the media?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not really one that I've had an issue with. I know that a great case study is, so, we've invaded the country of Iraq twice in my lifetime. First time was in 1991. And, if you can go back and read about this, it was a big issue that at the time, the elder George Bush administration really wanted to control the message. And photographers, it was my understanding, had to get okay on the release of pictures, and they argued, well, we can't give up, information to the enemy, blah, blah, blah. But it was super controlled. And there was one famous photograph. It's another Michigan instance. It's David Turnley's photo taken on a helicopter of a wounded U.S. soldier crying while laying next to him in a body bag is his friend. And Turnley had to fight to release that picture because the U.S. didn't want to show casualties of their own. And then you contrast that with the 2003 situation, which was the government decided they were going to embed 500 journalists in units around the war theater. And that's how I got involved in that sort of. I went a little bit later, but and then it was, it's like, so journalists really had free reign to photograph what our troops were doing. However, a lot of people argued that was just the government using the free press as a propaganda tool. Like, here we are, Team America, fuck yeah, And so it's a tricky situation. Obviously, in a situation like that, there's some security issues you got to consider, some safety issues for soldiers you got to consider. But now we're, in this nightmare situation of the Secretary of Defense, or whatever the hell we call it now, saying, trying to block the media from blocking photographers from attending these press briefings because he didn't like the way he looked in a picture. Mm-hmm. I think a judge ruled against that, but once they start getting away with that stuff, it's just going to be worse and worse and worse. So, I got some pretty strong opinions about that. And, I think the more, even federal courtrooms won't allow photographers. State courts, it's based on the state. They allow cameras in Kansas courtrooms, but it's really at the discretion of the judge. And it's like, well, why wouldn't a camera be allowed in a federal court case? I mean, it seems like, I understand maybe the legal argument of a tainted jury or something like that, but the jury's always been selected, whatever. The less censorship, the better.
And then, has there ever been a moment in time where you made a mistake in the press? Like, you did something, misinformation was accidentally done, or like you made a photographical mistake, an error, and how did you recover from that?
I'm trying to think. Obviously I've screwed up probably 1,000 photo captions in my time. I can't really think of anything beyond a mistake in a caption. A misspelled name, or misidentifying a person entirely. I've done that during, you think it's a number 2, but really it was a number 5, and then you call in that guy something else. I'm trying to think, one time going back to, I don't know if this answers your question, but going back to that 2020 George Floyd, I was shooting another event at that same intersection at 21st and Arkansas a few days prior, and the local TV people were trying to go live. And as they did, these crowds would surround them and hold up their beer and lots of middle fingers. And just like these TV reporters were getting mobbed. And I finally said to one of them, like, man, you need to get out of here. And I heard like people saying things like, let's flip the car over. And it was just getting tense and quite frankly, pretty frightening. And so I put up a photo on Facebook of that scene of the TV guys getting mobbed. And I mentioned at the end of what I posted that they were safe. And people took offense to that. Like, you're suggesting that these black people were, you're suggesting these TV people weren't safe just because everyone around them was black. And I really didn't know how to handle that because I knew what was going on. I could hear that things were about to go south. TV people later said, hey, thanks, man, for watching our back. But I felt like I couldn't really defend myself in that forum. And I just let it go and I just took the heat. Because it was like, it wasn't worth arguing over. But it's just like, well, and it's weird because every couple of years, someone will stumble across that on Facebook and I'll get like another like 27 comments about, my assumptions, but it wasn't really about that. So those are the things that in this kind of like social media world, I've had to be careful of. But that's the first one that comes to mind. It's just like, and maybe I should have worded it differently. Maybe I should have told the whole story of like, there were some threats of turning over a car. Everyone got out okay. So maybe the fault was with me and not explaining further.
Do you think it is necessary for journalists to have a collegiate degree to do their work?
I would probably say yes. And the reason why, journalists in general, legacy media, get accused of being liberal. Frequently. And there's a reason for that. And I would argue that reason is that most of them have advanced education that has taught them to think critically. And the reason we are where we are in this hellish timeline is people's inability to think critically. And I think that a college education, aside from your journalism classes, is as you're finding out right now, it isn't about filling your head with a bunch of stupid facts. It's about analyzing information and better understanding things like history or science. And so that's what a college education does, is it teaches you how to be analytical. And I think that is a paramount skill set to have as a journalist, more than the ability to write or take pictures or what have you. So I would say that yes. There's a lot of little things, from just the journalism education perspective that you gotta learn about how to gather and disseminate information accurately and correctly. And, my on-the-job training was the Daily Nebraskan, the student paper at the University of Nebraska. And I made mistakes there and screwed up things there. And boy, it sure prepared me. But then, being in a college environment too also surrounded me with other like-minded people trying to be analytical, and I was better off because of it. So I think it sure helps. I think it'd make you a better journalist, in order to, have an education like that.
All right. That seems to be all of my questions. You have been very helpful for my paper.